All right, day 98 of 100 days of visibility. Um, yeah, this is getting pretty exciting. Um, exciting is the wrong word. Accomplished. Feeling really accomplished about this. Because of a miscount, this is actually my 99th video. So I'm going to end up doing a total of 101. Oh well, like I mentioned a couple days ago, I'm going to go all the way to number 100, even though it's the 101st. But there's something very nice about the fact that technically, I'll be done with the challenge on the first day of spring, which is tomorrow. So that's pretty cool. So the whole point of this challenge for me has been practicing showing up, holding frequencies, and even when I'm interacting with others, literally or fictitiously. It's like here I am speaking to a theoretical audience, but I think a lot of people watch this afterwards, and somehow making this live feels different than if I'm making a recording. So with a recording, I can think, you know what, that didn't quite work. Let me restart this. I'm just a couple minutes in. And here, that's not what's going on. Although I did mean to stop relying entirely on Facebook's interface. Switch over to Zoom is a little more awkward. Anyway, small details. So today I had noticed, this morning in particular, I had noticed there's a very subtle way where I've been shifting from that. I keep putting a little bit of extra energy into, okay, and then I can present this, and then people will like it for these reasons, and here's how I can guide a pathway. This is particularly alive as I'm putting some of what feel like the finishing touches on the beginning of the program, but I'm likely to properly present the frequency of that within about a week. We'll see, because the frequency is what calls it out, not me. But as I put together these finishing touches, I keep feeling these impulses to design it in order to affect people in a certain way. And I keep losing a little bit of track on, wait, no, the question is, am I holding the frequency well? One of the more surprising adjustments for me was recognizing that as powerful as I have found really taking seriously the drama triangle or the victim triangle, and as much sense as it makes in the context of the program, logically, energetically it doesn't. So I ended up pulling it out. It might arise. I'll find out in the course of interacting with people. Oh, it looks like we actually need this, but removing it from the core was actually really important. I found that surprising and um, a peculiar kind of delightful. But this morning, I was talking with some friends, like I do on each Friday morning, and get together in a small group, and I kept noticing how I would, like, as I was listening to people, these habits of judgment would come up. There'd be this 1-2 that would happen very fast in my system by default of, oh, they're running into this kind of difficulty because they're doing XYZ wrong. I can help them by giving them ABC. And so this is a really basic rescuer pattern. This is, I know better how to live this part of your life than you do. Let me help you. Which on the surface sounds very good guy. It sounds very pleasant and supportive. In particular, it's a lot of what polishing our good guy badges looks like in the modern culture. Are you rescuing with enough energy? And it's toxic. It really is toxic. It, by which I mean something very particular. I'm adding a bit of judgment, and the judgment isn't strictly necessary, but I think in this case it's clearer. Creating the rescuing pattern, the focus is on the self and boosting the self and avoiding responsibility for meeting one's own desires, and instead encouraging others to be victims, to be weak, to be inadequate, and helping them to play into a narrative where they are weak or inadequate and where they need rescuing. And that may not be the conscious intention, but that's the energy behind it. And whatever energy is behind a set of actions will define the results of those actions over time, because they govern what choices are made. So noticing this 1-2, there's this sense of, oh, here is the rescuer energy again. And there's a core that I've learned to get in touch with, this core of stillness. I talked about this yesterday. Yesterday was a particularly long video. I think it was about 50 minutes. I didn't get to it until the end, really focusing on this bit of stillness. Which is ironic, that's the eternal. There's a quality, there's a very specific quality that is the inside choice. Am I inviting others into this rescuer-victim dance? Or being victimized by others or by myself? Or am I attacking others with this sense of, how dare you do this? Like the different flavors of victim consciousness, but like whatever game I'm playing, am I trying to manipulate the world around me to meet my needs? Or am I instead recognizing the single point that everything is centered on in my awareness? And noticing and talking about this, I actually don't have great language for it. I called this centering and compassion. The reason is that there's a centering move. Like what is, we talk about centering, like in martial arts, like center yourself. Centering has a lot to do with, at the rawest level, physical balance. Or is your weight placed well between your feet, where well often means something like even, but it can vary depending on the circumstance and the art. But it can also refer to an inner centering that has to do with emotional calm, stillness. Is your attention here? I'm talking about something that is sort of like that, but it keeps going. If you keep going, like instead of just balance, or instead of just the bit about a kind of emotional stability and mental clarity and focus, just keep going. What does it mean to gather all of the action and all of the focus into a single point? And if you answer that like a koan, it happens. By which I mean, rather than trying to answer the question like, well, what does it mean to pull it in? Well, I guess it could mean blah, 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 blah. That's going up into the mind. If you instead go down into experience. What is it to bring everything into a single point? All of the attention of action. To sort of witness this, but to stop trying to manipulate it directly. Recognizing things like, I don't actually have direct control over my fingers. I have the capacity to intend to move my fingers. And a kind of invisibility, because they're very useful. I sort of don't pay too much attention to them. They become invisible to my awareness so that I can use them to grab a cup, so that I can point, so that I can gesture. But when I'm not paying much attention to them, they sort of happen. That occurs on its own. The place where I actually have a point of choice is much farther back. Where am I placing my attention, and with what intent? That's where I have control, not in the result of the intention. So really gathering that, not as I squeeze it in, because what am I doing with the squeezing? Oh, it's extra tension. What if I just open that up? What if I just relax? That's the centering part. I realize this may not be a satisfying intellectual description, but It's a reasonably accurate one. It's noticing where is the center of my attention. It's on this point where I have this impression of existing, which is not in my body, it's not in my emotions, it's not in my thoughts, it's much, much, much farther back than that. It interacts with all of that, but it's when I try to go through, can I make you understand? Then attention applies, and then I have to go into manipulation, and you get to resist, and I sort of work with the resistance, or maybe you get sucked in, and then I can feel strong, and then it becomes a lot of me. There's a lot of ego, an image of myself that I'm taking as me that I get confused about, interacting with yours. That's not very pleasant. So, in watching my friends, I noticed a lot of these things washing up. And I could recognize there's this question of bodhicitta, the open-hearted, sincere desire to awaken for the sake of all beings. There's a quality here of, when me judging, there's some details. Like one person beating themselves up over, okay, maybe really should like lean into some of these feelings that I'm resisting, but I kind of don't want to, and this is difficult, but I guess I should. And for me, I can look at it and go, oh, well, here's the structural glitches that you're encountering. Here's what you could do that would give you relief. But coming in with that attitude and with like the urgency of how can I find a way to share my wisdom? That's about me. That's not about them. Is it kind to them? Does it respect where they are on their path? Does it trust that they are doing the most sensible thing with their lives that they can? No. So noticing that the fact that I am seeing flaws in their personal growth and their method of dealing with their emotions is a fact about me. That's part of the centering move. Recognizing that I am the only job I have. Really taking that seriously. It doesn't mean I can't interact with others. It doesn't mean I can't help others. But I can't try to help others and have that result in giving them meaningful aid. That's not how it works. Like on some, because there's sort of a delay between, because the physical world is slow. I'll say it that way. Because the physical world is slow compared to the more subtle realms. There's a way where an intent to help can end up helping, can end up creating movement that causes help anyway. But if you maintain the intention, depending on what energy is behind it, this very often, it normally twists into some kind of manipulation and some kind of egoic thing. It's very difficult for it not to. This is what I observe all over the place. It's definitely what I observe in myself. So noticing that the place, what I just said is not quite accurate. It has to do with if I'm trying to focus on creating an action, like I'm trying to help this person sort out their feelings. If I'm trying to help this person sort out their feelings by looking at what they are doing wrong and helping them to notice it, I can articulate what wrong is and go, well, it's not really wrong. They're doing the best they can. This is just a part that they can't see. Okay, and I happen to be able to see it, so maybe I can offer it, and if they choose to accept it, then I can trust that that's natural for them, and if they don't accept it, then I can trust that it's not, and there's something I'm misperceiving. There's something about that whole structure that is like, okay, it's almost clean, almost, but what's the reason for articulating it that way? Is it because it's true, or is it to avoid the discomfort of the fact that I am judging them? And that's more true. And that's a fact about me. So why am I so focused on fixing that person's feelings? I mean, helping them. I mean, offering them a perspective that they can choose to take or not take. In doing that, I've lost my center. And that's not real care. That's not real kindness. That's not actual compassion. The actual core wish of bodhicitta, of the desire to awaken for the sake of all beings, as I currently understand it, as my mind is currently best able to reflect it and therefore best able to articulate it, it is that to the degree that I am clear and pure, that I am embodying a pure mind and a deep perception of all of the layers of truth and being, my presence acts as an example that can help all beings to attune to that truth and that clarity. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the truth and the clarity. But it's achieved by my embodying it. So to take that as, oh, that's my job. That is my only job. Not to awaken for the sake of escaping pain. Like, that's part of how I can work with my ego, my body, my instincts, my impulses. I have some pretty strong desires and some cravings and some aversions, and these are all places where I have fuel. And I can recognize, well, the source of actual relief and fulfillment is in enlightenment. And well, enlightenment is a funny word for this, but it means so many different things. But there is a kind of clarity that I've glimpsed. I embody a lot more than I used to. I can tell that I can embody a lot more, and that the more I embody, the more pleasant it is for me. And the more intense, like the negatives are also 10 years ago, I had no idea how serious the negatives could be. And I had no concept of how bad an experience could be. This wasn't just, oh, I didn't recognize torture. I mean, there's something about what it means to fall into an existential pit of dread and despair and terror that was, like, I might have been able to hear the words, but I had no framework for it. Now I do. So my capacity for horrible experiences is vastly expanded. But on net, what I actually experience, for the most part, is a deep kind of assurance, a recognition that I'm orienting to reality and that the depths of pleasure are much more available. So that is a fact, a true fact. As I understand more and more reality, I understand the bads and the goods are both a lot more extreme than I had previously been able to access. And in the course of focusing on the stillness that is beyond the entire structure, I experience more of it as good, and the things that I consider good are more likely to happen. And when the bad stuff happens, it's not nearly as atrocious as it could be. I don't get trapped nearly as much and nearly as often. So that's all beautiful as fuel for the ego. So the ego doesn't just entirely 100% oppose everything having to do with being present, awake, alert, and being an embodiment of actual love and care. But there is a deeper thing that this all points to, which is being an embodiment of love and care. So when I'm looking at my friends and I'm noticing, oh, my mind is correctly picking up on some structures about what they're going through and what kind of direction would be less suffering for them. It's also missing a lot of things. I'm noticing the pain in myself of the judgment and the urgency of needing to find a way to help. And the way that that's about me and the way that it's about finding a source of validation, that is a pain in myself that I can do something about. by doing something about that, if my presence has kindness to radiate out to my friends, then my doing that work is what does that. Maybe not necessarily in that moment, but making that choice over and over and over again, and deepening it, embodying it more fully, that lets me be a kind presence. Today, I got a fruition of this that I wasn't really expecting, um, which is part of where the preciousness of it comes from. And there's a type of social challenge I've had for a long time. I've probably mentioned it in this whole video series at some point. I honestly don't remember at this point. The gist of it being that I'm very charismatic. I know that. And when I slip into particularly a type of egoic pushing, it can be very forceful. When I want people to get something, and just like a subtle force, a subtle violence. It's not that severe as subtle violence goes. It's just that in the subtle realm, I am big. I am very powerful, and I know how to make myself stronger, and I'm doing so. So, the type of feedback I've long gotten is about how I can often create a sort of bifurcated response in people. Different people say it differently. Some people say I'm like my charisma makes them suspicious of me. Like, wait, I think this guy is making sense, but somehow he's like making too much sense, and I find myself wanting to believe him, and so I want to, like, I find myself having this kind of resistance to listening to it. I'm like, okay, um, and my my co-founder for the Center for Applied Rationality used to push on me about this all the time. It was a major source of undermining my own confidence in myself. Because to me, this turns on most clearly when I'm really excited and clear about something. And the thing I'm talking about is not necessarily about pushing. It's just when my ego gets involved, there's some extra push. But there's something about the confidence with which I speak, where I can even say things like, yeah, I really don't know what's true here. I think XYZ is the closest I can get. I act like XYZ is true because that's what I think makes sense, but I don't know. There's something about the solidity with which I say that that seems to disturb some people. And I used to turn myself into pretzels emotionally and energetically, trying to find a way to be myself but be palatable to everybody. Not possible. And as I've taken that in and gone, oh, no, that's about them. It's entirely about them. My job is to anchor in truth, to be as clear as I can with and for myself, and to let the truth speak through me. And some people are going to have bifurcated responses. I know that. Sometimes it's going to be because there is some kind of uncleanliness in me. That's true. But in which case, it's not their responsibility to point it out to me. It's my responsibility to notice. But for a lot of them, and this is something that I've known for a long time, and now I'm coming to feel and recognize, oh, there's actually, like, part of it is that I am speaking in part about truths that egos cannot stand. That's not the only reason, and I don't expect that explanation to resonate for quite a few people. I think for a lot of them, the fact that I am charismatic and can be persuasive throws up alarm bells for reasons they can't quite trace. The basic reason is that the West is allergic to meaning making because it's been a proxy for meaningfulness, strong feelings of meaningfulness, and getting compelled by powerful feelings of meaningfulness because those have been strongly correlated in the past with things like dangerous cults like the Jim Jones thing and also Nazism. People's lives have been destroyed by parasitic processes of making meaning. So if something compels with meaning making, as a culture, we've generally learned to find that dangerous and something you should distance yourself from and examine, and because you should trust your mind more than you trust your soul, so to speak, because clearly your soul can undermine your mind, and then you end up in cults or whatever, right? The problem is actually partial trust of instinct and partial trust of the mind, and then there being a gap between them where there's no foundation, and then manipulative people, or even accidentally manipulative people, can slip in these manipulations into those gaps where there's a sense of no foundation. But because it gets tagged with meaningfulness, anyone who can show up embodying truth and meaning has the potential to set off a sense of, whoa, 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 what are you doing? You're making sense, and I find myself wanting to agree with you, and it's moving me, and it's making me think about changing things in my life, and wait, what's going on? Like, yeah. Anyway, there's a bunch of different reasons, but the actual core, the essence, is the fact that I used to get hooked by this kind of reflection. People being suspicious of me for reasons they couldn't articulate. There's something wrong with me that people's intuitions are picking up with that I need to fix. And you just internalizing, no. That doesn't mean that the pain isn't there, that I don't have the hook, that I'm not reactive to it. It's just I'm not needing to manipulate other people's responses to me in order for me to deal with the discomfort anymore. There's an impulse in that direction, but it doesn't have the steering wheel. So embodying that, feeling that, digesting it, and in particular this coming up in the conversation earlier today. There was a lot of inner work of being with those sensations. Excuse me. But being basically relaxed and willing to be with these sensations. And to have, to make it so that the urge to get away from the sensations cannot translate into the urge to control others' way of perceiving me. Varying degrees of successful, but for the most part, doing pretty well. And it reflected back to me some of these people saying, wow, like when we first started doing these Friday morning chats a couple of months ago, I think you would have reacted very differently. We can really see the kind of work that you're doing and feel touched by that. It felt really nourishing to me. Like the world is a mirror, and part of centering is recognizing it as a mirror. The mirror can let me see parts of myself that I have a hard time seeing directly. It's the same reason we use mirrors to look at our faces. We can't see our faces, we can only see our reflections. Having the mirror reflect back to me that this sense in my heart of I can feel the transformations and I can feel the truth of that. But getting a kind of validation from the parts of the world that parts of me still consider more real. It sort of helps to ease and relax me and feel this sort of melting that happens in my chest, across my upper arms, my back. My heart melts a little bit. And to feel the fact that my embodiment of this is touching. And that it's felt. And I can see how that actually is supportive. It's not coming from me trying, it's coming from me being. I knew this is how it would work mentally. It made sense in the model. But there's a deeper trust that's building because of this. It feels like the more that I can center, the more that I can embody a remembrance that my only job is me, the more I can feel the authentic compassion of my heart, the sincere bodhicitta, the desire to awaken for all beings. And that's not just a theory, but that I can feel it ringing in my belly and in my heart, in my bones and my genitals. Throughout my body, I can feel this truth. That it can feed back into its practice. That I can actually help everyone, but I do it by prioritizing my own development. It's a tiny subtlety that in slightly different contexts I'm a lot better at articulating, but it's very mental. Yeah, it's more mental. I'll say it's more mental. I don't know about very mental. And this quality of, well, what exactly is the ego? What is it for the self to get in the way of compassion? And there's something really beautiful about just deepening the embodiment of the understanding of that, even if I don't know how to verbalize it yet. And I'll get there. It's how I work. All right, and that's it for today. 2 more of these, and I'll probably take a small break. And then on to other adventures here. Thank you for listening.